Hello and welcome to all of you. I'm sure all of you have been in situations where you wanted to communicate to someone, perhaps on a one-to-one basis, or maybe on a one-to-many basis, but you didn't know how to go about this. Well, we often face this dilemma as to how do we go about preparing for an important meeting, or perhaps a client presentation, or perhaps talking to a group of stakeholders, or maybe even to have a meeting with our own colleagues. So I'm going to share with you a simple but effective framework called the communication core, which will help us to prepare well for any kind of communication encounter. So what is the communication core and how do we use it? The communication core basically consists of 5 questions, 5 simple questions, but nonetheless very, very critical questions. What are these questions? The first question is who. The next one is why. The third question is what. Next is when. And finally, we have how. Now, these are all very simple and obvious questions. How do they help us? Let's understand step by step. So the first question that you ask yourself whenever you're about to present your thoughts to someone is who. Now, what does who stands for? Who stands for who is my audience? Now, who is your audience? Are we going to talk to a client who is going to listen to our pitch for the first time? Or perhaps, am I going to talk to a group of colleagues at work and am I going to try and sell them an idea that I have? Or maybe I'm going to talk to my own manager and therefore convince him about a particular proposal. Or it could be a meeting with somebody else, just trying to give information and receive information. So who is my audience is a very obvious but a very important question. Unfortunately, a lot of times we miss out on the who. Now, along with asking ourselves who is our audience, it is equally important to understand the background of our audience. Now, what does the background mean? For example, if your audience is highly educated, then it means that you need to provide them enough opportunity so that they share their thoughts and ideas with you. Perhaps trying to speak a bit more than natural would actually mean that you're insulting their intelligence in some way. At the same time, if your audience is not that educated, they are people who come from backgrounds where they haven't been exposed to a lot of corporate world, then you will have to shift the method in which you present your thoughts. Similarly, you also have to look into the gender mix. Am I going to talk to an audience who comprises mainly of males or of females, or it's a mixture of the two? Am I going to talk to an experienced audience, or am I going to talk to freshers? All of these are part of the question who. So getting to know your audience is a very, very important step before you plan for anything else. So if you're not clear about who exactly is your audience, do your research around it. Try and understand more about your audience, because getting to know your audience is half the battle in itself. Now, that might sound a bit exaggerating, but that's not. Because once you know who your audience is, you can understand where they come from, what are their aspirations, and in simple words, you can empathize with them better. So always begin by asking, who is my audience? Now, once you get clarity around who is your audience, it is equally important to ask in the same breath, why? Now, what is the meaning of why? So why basically talks about the objective or the purpose of your communication. Now, what could be the purpose of communication? We communicate so that we can communicate, right? No, that's not true. We communicate for multiple reasons. For example, if you're meeting a client, you're communicating to convince them about the products and services of your organization and why they should be looking forward to working with you. If you're communicating to your manager, perhaps you're trying to convince your manager about a certain situation and how we need to go about it. If you're communicating with your colleagues at work, perhaps you're trying to sell them an idea or you're trying to convince them to adopt a certain method of doing things. So whenever we communicate, we are either trying to convince people, or we are trying to inform people, or we are trying to understand and acquire information from them. There could be other reasons as well. But whatever the reason might be, it's extremely important for you as a communicator to ask yourself, why am I communicating? What is the purpose for which I am communicating now, or I'm going to communicate rather? Getting to know the purpose is an extremely important step, because it helps you clarify to yourself what is it that needs to be stated and what is it that you need to share with people so that you're able to either convince them or get information out of them. And that brings us to step number 3, which is the what. What is the meaning of what? So what basically stands for what is the content or information that I'm going to share with other people. Well, a lot of times we are clear about what do we want to say, but it's even better if you can write it down on a piece of paper. If you don't want to write down everything elaborately, then you can simply jot down the critical points that you may want to use during the course of your discussion. What it does, it helps you to clarify to yourself what exactly are you going to focus during the course of your meeting. But at the same time, when you're talking about what do you want to share, it's equally important to ask yourself, what is it that you do not want to share? Now, why is it important? Because a lot of things, especially in an organizational context, are absolutely confidential. And therefore, it is important that you do not divulge too much of information, whether it is a client or any other external party. So be very clear about what you want to share, but at the same time, what you do not want to share. So you have to respect confidentiality and privacy of data. So that answers the question, what? Once you've answered what, the next important question to look forward to is when. So what does when talk about? When talks about timing. Often in cricket, we talk about timing, isn't it? Is that your ability to hit the ball at the very right moment so that the ball gathers momentum and you're able to score maximum runs. Similarly, in the context of corporate communication, timing is everything. So you need to ask yourself, I have a certain piece of information that I need to share with somebody. When do I share it? Do I share it maybe at the beginning of the day or towards the end of the day or somewhere in between? Or perhaps on a long-term basis, you might want to ask yourself, if I have to share something with a client, what would be the opportune moment to do that? Do I need to share this information tomorrow? Perhaps sometime next week, or after we have completed the deadline, or maybe by the end of quarter, right? So asking yourself time and again, when do I share this information is an extremely important step for you to be clear which moment is likely to fetch you the best possible result. And we all do this, don't we? For example, if you have to ask your manager for a leave, then you would definitely try and look at the mood that your manager is in right now. If your manager looks grumpy at the beginning of the day, you might allow some more hours before you approach your manager with your leave request. And that's a sensible thing to do because we are all human beings dictated by psychological behavioral patterns. So it's important to understand when is the right time to approach someone with your ideas and your suggestions. And then finally, we have the how. So what does how talk about? How basically talks about the method that we are going to adopt. So let's say, for example, if you have to send someone detailed piece of information, what would you do? Well, you have certain options. For example, you can meet up someone one-to-one and talk to the person and let that person know everything that you need to share. So an in-person meeting would be extremely important in this case. However, given the constraints of time, you might also want to do a telephonic call. Or for that matter, if you want to, you can also get into a virtual communication mode wherein you have an interaction with the other person. But at the same time, if you want to share an information quickly and at the spur of the moment, you might adopt maybe a WhatsApp messenger service or even a text message. Or sometimes a quick email might suffice. So depending on the urgency of the message and how detailed you need the information to be, you can choose the manner in which that information needs to be conveyed. But why is this important? Because a lot of times we have the right message, but the wrong method. And when you have the right message with the wrong method, unfortunately, it ends up being a wrong message in the first place. So to avoid this situation, always ask yourself, what is the best way that I can convey this message to my audience so that they get maximum idea about what exactly I want to convey? And of course, that enhances my chances of getting the result in my favor. So getting to know the method is very, very crucial in this regard. Now, the method could be anything as we spoke. It could be an in-person meeting. It could be an email. It could be a virtual communication meeting. It could be a text message. It could be a WhatsApp chat. It could be anything. But being clear about which method to use when is an important thing that one needs to learn and acquire over time. So that precisely is the communication core. It starts with who, understanding who is your audience. Then we talk about the why. Why am I sharing this message? What is it that I'm looking forward to achieve? What is the objective? Then comes what. Now that I'm clear about the message, I need to know what to share and perhaps even what not to share. And thereafter, we look at when. The timing is absolutely quintessential. I need to know when to communicate my message so that it doesn't backfire and I get the desired result. And finally, we focus on the how. And how talks about the method. Do I send an email? Do I talk to someone in person? Or is there any other method that is better for me? Once you have clarity on these 5 questions, your communication is likely to be far, far more effective, and it is likely to yield the desired result. So use the communication core for almost any kind of communication that you're going to have, whether it is within the organization or even outside the organization. I hope the communication core helps you find your sweet spot the next time you're about to communicate your ideas, thoughts, and feelings. I wish you all the very best using the communication core. Thank you so much for listening.